Good morning, everybody. How are you? How are you all getting on? So I'm following on the theme of emotional talking, emotional behaviour, how we communicate when our emotions are involved. Lots of research has been done around emotions and the emotional and the logical brain, or the primitive and the logical brain. There's many different words for it. So I'll keep this as simple as I possibly can. When we go into an emotional state, there are generally 6 emotions, and today we're going to talk about anger. Last week we talked about fear, and how when fear drives us and we compare ourselves especially to other people, then what can happen is we can become jealous, and when we become jealous, that causes us to act and communicate in a different way. So we're going to talk about anger and how that affects our behaviour. And some of you might relate to this more as frustration than anger. Often when I've been negotiating or talking to somebody in a crisis before, and I'll say, oh, it looks like you're very angry, they'll correct me and say, no, actually I'm very frustrated. So anger and frustration are very similarly linked, but the actual emotion that we relate it to is the anger emotion. So let's talk about what happens when we get angry, and I'm going to talk about it from my perspective because I don't know what it's like in your world when you become angry. But when I was a child, I was a very angry child. So there's a great picture of me as a teenager with my sister that my sister dug out recently, and I'm like this teenager having a picture taken. Similar hair actually, to be fair, at the time, but I'm like that. I was a very angry teenager because in my world nobody understood me. I probably didn't understand myself, and it's only as you grow up and you get experience. Grow up, that sounds so condescending, I didn't mean it like that. Grow older, as you get older you get experience, and as you get experience you then have something to reflect and base it back on. So when you're a teenager, you've never been a teenager before, and so you have different emotions and different experiences. And I was a very angry child. I was very angry before that. My mum believes that I had ADHD, without being diagnosed, and now I'm able to take the mickey out of her and make her feel really bad about not getting me looked after properly when I was younger. It is a joke, by the way. So but actually I'm glad I wasn't given the label ADHD, because I am a typical live into something. So my internal dialogue helps me to live in. So it took me 3 attempts to get my maths O level. So I always say, or I used to, and I'm working really hard on this, is to say I'm rubbish at maths, and then live into that, because that becomes the barrier. So I think if I'd been given a label as a child, I probably would have lived in it to it. I'm not saying that that's what happens to others, I'm just saying that's what would have happened to me, because that's my sort of character. And when I used to get angry, because I don't get angry very often now, thank goodness, I've grown out of it, but when I used to get angry, there would be no warning signs, there would be no telling what was going to happen, and I would just get this cloud of you call it red mist, is probably the easiest way to describe it. It didn't look red, it was just a cloud. And what would happen is I would go and destroy things. So I would go into my room and I would rip the pillows up. I would draw all over the walls. I would smash anything up that I could get my hands on. So you can imagine I was a very lovely child to look after. My poor mum and dad did the best they can with little information, I think. And I use this as an example because this was, I believe, me becoming frustrated at the world and then getting angry. And as I've got older and learnt how to control my emotions a lot more, I'm not great at it, especially going through, sorry guys if you're watching this, but PMT or the menopause was my last trigger of hormonal imbalance and emotional madness. And my hair's going to look great now because it's raining, but hey, look at that. My sister loves doing a Zoom call with me at the moment because she just laughs at my hair all the time. So anger. So what happens when we get angry? So I'm going to relate this to me. Hopefully you'll be able to relate it as well. But when I get frustrated, so if I can't do something, so let's take technology, and I'm trying to do something desperately, and I'm trying to get something to work, and I don't know about you, but it's generally when I have to do something. So for example, yesterday I was a live interviewee on somebody's webinar, really important to them. They had people coming from all over the world, and the technology, so I had to go and find somewhere really quiet, which in my house is a little bit crazy, so I left the premises and went somewhere else. And then I tried to print off the PowerPoint that had all the Q&As, because we had to stick very strictly to a script. And as I'm printing off, I print it off twice, and I'm not printing off the information bit. All I'm printing off is the PowerPoint slides. And I'm looking at the time, and in my head I had loads of time to start with, and suddenly I've now got 20 minutes to be on this call, and I can feel the build-up. I can feel the build-up of the frustration beginning in my body. Now, it didn't turn to anger, so we'll talk about frustration first rather than anger, but I could feel it and I had the same reaction. So with experience now, and I'm able to be more self-aware about how I react, I know that I get a tenseness in my shoulders. I know that my internal dialogue will start to kick in and it will start to say things to me like, see, why would anybody interview you? You're not an expert, you can't even print the stuff off the printer. And that whole load of dialogue that starts to chip in, or you're going to be late, and if you're late, how unprofessional are you going to look? And not only are you going to look unprofessional, she's never going to invite you again, and there's all these people and you'll be letting her down. So we're off on running on internal dialogue. So that's the first thing I catch, is that internal dialogue. And I was like, hang on a sec, let's just take a big deep breath and work out what we can do. So asking a different question rather than letting the internal dialogue run away with you, but stopping, pressing the big pause button, and then just saying, okay, what can I do? And actually I had the PowerPoint presentation on my computer, so I could do the webinar and have the PowerPoint right there on the computer, and that was fine. And you know, we still have plenty of time to do it. So rather than letting that frustration kick in, because before, when I was younger, what would happen is the frustration would kick in and I wouldn't be able to do it. But then, or I'd get to the webinar and the interview and I'd be an absolute mess because I'd allowed that frustration to kick in. Now, anger can stem after frustration. So when you're angry, you probably get a tenseness in your body. And if somebody's pressing your emotional triggers, so let's take an example of you're having a discussion with somebody and they're pressing your emotional triggers, and you can feel it, can't you? You can feel that they're pressing your emotional triggers because it starts to build up. Mine starts to build up in my stomach and I start to get tense and I start to get resistance. I can feel myself almost going like, I'm probably not very good with the non-verbal communication. So if you've ever had a conversation with me and I'm starting to resist it in my head, you'll probably notice it because I'll be like, whoa, hang on a sec. Now, before I had experience, before I learned lots more about negotiation and psychology and communication, I would answer straight back. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that I never do that anymore, because I do, especially if one of my emotional triggers has really been pushed. Fairness is the big one for me. If I think I'm being treated unfairly, or if I think somebody else is being treated unfairly. So think about what your emotional triggers are, what your values and beliefs are, and when somebody pushes them, what sort of reaction do you get? Because generally the reaction that we give when we're in a state of emotional state, and we're taking anger today, will be one where you'll just throw some angry words back out, or you might lash out. You might be the sort of person that lashes out. Do you know that when you get very angry, you'll go and punch something like the pillow or the wall? Perhaps you've hurt your hand before from doing that. I'm going to confess here, I've punched the wall before and it does hurt. It hurts a lot. Or perhaps you are somebody who recognises when you're getting into that state and you're able to walk away before you say that. And that's the hard thing, because what generally happens is when you're getting angry and somebody sees that they've pressed your emotional buttons, then they're dealing with their own emotion, and often that's guilt, or it also might be anger. They will probably follow you. So they really follow you to apologise, or they'll follow you to carry on the argument. And that's hard when you're that person that's walking away and trying to communicate that to the other person, that actually I just need some space now and I just want to be on my own so that I can get myself together and we can come back to this conversation. So not are you only dealing with how you're feeling and what's happening with your brain and your emotions, but you're also dealing with the other person now, what they're feeling and their reactions. Road rage is an absolute classic of this. Sadly, working in the police, I have seen many people killed because of the emotion of anger that gets triggered, because before you know what's happened, you've taken an action that you wouldn't normally have taken when you're in a logical mind, and then you have the consequences of that action, and it's so sad. It's incredibly sad. I would say, in my experience, the majority of murders are done from an emotional point of view, and then you end up ruining not just the person who's dead, but then that person's life and then other people's lives as well, all because of that instant trigger, that emotional reaction that comes into anger, and you do something, you lash out before you know what's happened, and your whole world has changed. So tragic. So if this helps anybody in any way, shape or form, then that's brilliant. And if you think it will help anybody else, then please just let them know about this page and this video. So how can you deal with your emotions? So we know very simply that your brain is split into, I'm going to call it two parts. So your logical brain and your emotional brain. Your emotional brain is your limbic brain, the one that goes all the way back to running away from dinosaurs. And your logical brain is the one that will help you to process the information and deal with things in a very calm, like this video is a very calm, well, I think it's very calm, a very calm sort of systematic approach to how to deal with emotions. But if I was emotional, I would probably be shouting and swearing and saying, it doesn't work, you can't do it, you can't grab hold of your own emotions. I'm not saying it's easy in any way, shape or form, because it's not, because you have to start with you and your self-awareness. But the more educated you become and the more you learn about yourself, and we are all different, but we do have the same emotions. There's lots of studies, you can Google it. People say there's 6 main emotions and the other ones stem off of it, and so I'm just concentrating on those main 6. There'll be other people that have different opinions, because the great thing about the world is the more research we do, the more we learn. But simply put, having travelled around the world, I see these emotions in everybody. It doesn't matter if you're in Australia or Oman or Saudi or the UK, we have these emotions. But sometimes we display them in a different way depending on our own culture. So how do you react when your emotional buttons are pushed? What do you do when you're angry? Are you a lasher outer? Do you say things? Next time you feel yourself getting angry, what can you do that works for you to stop yourself from doing it? Now, it might be that you take yourself to a room and that you shout and swear. And do you know what? There's nothing wrong with that, because you're not hurting anybody else. You're going off and you're letting off steam. Sometimes you just need to let it out and let off the steam. And just get rid of it. And if you can do it in that safe environment, do you know what? I love medicine ball slams and boxing. My physical training helps me to deal with my emotional brain. So if I'm having a particularly stressful day, I'll go down the gym, I'll grab a medicine ball and I will slam it to the floor. So I'm not hurting anybody, but I'm getting rid of that tension, that emotion, bringing myself down. So what we're doing when we talk to people in crisis especially, we're always taught to bring them from an emotional state to a logical state. Because whilst they're in an emotional state, you can't have a logical conversation. That makes sense, doesn't it? So why do we try and do that in our own relationships? So, for example, if my emotional buttons are pushed by Megan, who's 13 now, and when you're a teenager, you're going through all those different stages, you're learning, you're growing, and you have some information to base life on. And quite frankly, you think you're right most of the time. But we all think we're right, don't we? Even now at the age of 51, I'm probably not right in a lot of things that I think, but I like to think I'm right, because we like to feel valued and we like to believe that we are right, and we'll look for the evidence that makes us right. But when we know that we're doing that, then we can do something about it and we can stop and go, actually, is there a different way? So what works for you on emotion? What buttons are pushed for your emotional triggers? Where do you feel it? Do you feel it across your shoulders? Do you feel it in your stomach? Do you feel it in your head? What can you do that will work for you? Do you suffer from road rage? Because that is a great emotional response. So if somebody cuts up, is your immediate reaction to give them a sign or shout and swear your head off in the car? Or even to follow somebody up close? Perhaps that's happened to you. I remember driving down the motorway once and accidentally, I did cut somebody up, accidentally, I didn't mean to. My fault, I hadn't checked, they're in that blind spot. And then they followed me like this all the way down the motorway. It was pretty scary, but then that triggers something in you and you're like, hang on, you can't do that to me. So I know what I'll do. I'll do something more erratic, like press my brake lights. Crazy. We do crazy things which could have caused an accident, of course. And I'm definitely not proud of the actions that I take when I go into my emotional angry state. So I hope that helps. I hope that you realise that when you're in an emotional state or somebody else is emotional, it's very difficult to have a logical conversation. So the idea is that we want to calm everything down. Please don't say calm down. That'll probably be the worst thing that you could ever say to somebody in an emotional state, because what you're going to get back, I am calm. I've probably said that many times myself and got that reaction back. So saying to somebody calm down is one of the worst things, and will press the emotional trigger, because when you're emotional you think you are calm because you're not being logical. So when somebody is having let's call it a crisis, an emotional crisis, because let's do inverted commas, because we do have a little mini emotional crisis, and that triggers us to be emotional, which triggers our behaviour and our thought pattern. So when we are dealing with somebody who is also angry, let them get to a space. Don't follow them up to their room to continue the shouting and the argument. And think about how you interact with other people and how you interact with yourself. So let's break it down. Become more self-aware. Work out if you're in an emotional state, or if the other person is in an emotional state. If there are if there are emotions involved right here, right now, do you need to have this conversation, or can we wait for the conversation to be had at another time and let emotions come down and think logically? And what do you need to do to help yourself when you're emotional? And what emotions do you find that trigger you the most? So frustration becoming anger, or going back to the jealousy, the fear. Do you compare yourself to everybody all of the time? Right, I hope that's helped. I've got to crack on. I'm getting far too wet standing out here. So have a lovely day, and I'll be back next week and we'll deal with another emotion. Take care, have a great day.